The digital clock on my laptop glowed. 11:53 p.m. My dorm room was dead silent except for the low hum of the cheap mini fridge. Then that soft ping of a new email. Probably just another university announcement or spam. But the subject line, it punched the air right out of my lungs. Grade posted. SOC 101 Introduction to Social Justice Frameworks. Professor Davies. My stomach plummeted. My fingers felt numb as I clicked it open. There it was. Stark white screen, black text. Final paper grade, F. Overall course grade, F. Failed. An F? It felt like a physical blow. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of nausea. All that work, weeks of research, careful writing, meticulously following his own damn rubric, for nothing? My eyes scanned down, desperate for an explanation, anything that made sense. And then I saw his comment. Short, sterile, and swimming in the kind of academic gobbledygook he specialized in. Submission fails to sufficiently engage with intersectional paradigms and demonstrates a fundamental lack of critical reflexivity regarding the author's positionality. Fails to deconstruct dominant narratives effectively. It was meaningless jargon. A smokescreen. He hadn't graded my paper, he judged me. He'd failed me because I didn't parrot his woke ideology, because I dared to think critically instead of just nodding along. My mind raced. The scholarship I desperately needed, the summer internship that depended on my GPA. All potentially up in smoke because of this petty tyrant in a tweed jacket. Fury, cold and sharp, began to replace the shock. He thought he could hide behind his virtue-signaling buzzwords and ruin my future? He thought he was untouchable? Oh, he had no idea. He just handed me a reason to look closer, much closer. And I had a gut feeling that his perfect, inclusive facade was hiding something rotten. Something scandalous. And I was going to find it. Let me back up a bit. My name's Mark. Before this whole nightmare started, I was just a regular guy, a sophomore trying to navigate the challenges of an engineering program. My world was supposed to be about stress-strain curves, fluid dynamics, coding-efficient algorithms. Things that had right answers, things that were based on logic and evidence, not subjective feelings or ideological purity tests. I wasn't political, not really. I believed in hard work, common sense, treating people decently, the basics. I didn't have time for the campus culture wars. I had problem sets due. College was my stepping stone. My parents helped where they could, but I was relying on a partial scholarship and good grades to keep the dream alive and hopefully land a decent job after graduation, one that could help me build a stable life, maybe help my folks out too. Keeping my GPA above a 3.5 wasn't just about pride, it was a necessity. My focus was intense. Library sessions fueled by lukewarm coffee, late nights deciphering complex equations, the quiet satisfaction of finally solving a problem that seemed impossible hours before. My life felt structured, demanding, but fundamentally fair. If you put in the work, you generally got the results. That's how I thought the world, or at least the academic world, was supposed to operate. But the university, in its infinite wisdom, had this mandatory humanities requirement. A single course designed to, make us well-rounded or something. The list of options read like a parody of academia's navel-gazing tendencies, eco-feminist readings of 19th-century poetry, deconstructing gender in digital spaces, theorizing post-capitalist futures. I scrolled through, desperately seeking the least offensive option. Introduction to Social Justice Frameworks, Sociology 101, sounded almost neutral. Maybe it would be about actual social structures, historical movements, real-world issues. I figured I could handle one semester of it. Just get the credit, tick the box, and move on. What a monumental miscalculation that turned out to be. Because Sociology 101 wasn't a class. It was Professor Alistair Davies' personal fiefdom. And entering his lecture hall was like stepping through the looking glass into a world where common sense went to die. Professor Davies. He was probably pushing 50 but dressed like he was trying to recapture his 30s, slim-fit shirts, trendy sneakers that looked faintly ridiculous with his professor attire, that perpetually smug expression half hidden behind expensive-looking eyeglasses. He carried himself with an air of profound self-importance, like he was single-handedly bearing the weight of enlightening us ignorant masses. His smile, deployed often, was wide but disconcertingly vacant, never quite reaching his eyes. It was the smile of someone performing empathy, not feeling it. The first day set the stage for the entire semester's farce. No syllabus overview, no discussion of grading criteria beyond vague mentions of engagement and criticality. Instead, we launched straight into the pronoun ritual. "Okay, folks," Davies announced, beaming that artificial smile, "let's create a brave space together. We'll go around the room. Please share your name, your preferred pronouns, and perhaps one social justice issue you're passionate about." My eyes instinctively rolled. Look, use whatever pronouns you want, it costs me nothing. But the compulsory nature of it, the way Davies leaned forward, nodding with almost fetishistic intensity when someone offered up exy/sir or face/fair pronouns, it felt less like genuine inclusion and more like a bizarre public alignment check. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. "Mark he/him. And I guess I'm interested in economic inequality." Davies just gave a curt nod, his gaze already moving on, clearly unimpressed by my lack of esoteric self-identification. His lectures were a whirlwind of jargon. He tossed around terms like kyriarchy, intersectionality, hegemonic masculinity, and epistemic violence with casual frequency, rarely bothering to define them clearly. It felt less like teaching and more like brandishing a specialized vocabulary designed to intimidate and exclude anyone not already initiated into his specific ideological cult. You either nodded along, pretending to understand the convoluted linguistic knots he tied, or you risked being implicitly branded as unenlightened, possibly even hostile. The air in the lecture hall was thick with a kind of nervous conformity. My first real run-in happened about a month in. Davies was deep into a monologue about implicit bias in STEM fields, making sweeping generalizations about engineering culture being inherently exclusionary. As an engineering student who actually spent time in those departments, it sounded like a caricature. I waited for a pause, then raised my hand. "Professor," I started, trying to keep my tone respectful, "while I agree diversity is important, some of what you're describing doesn't quite match my experience. Many engineering projects require intense collaboration, and ability tends to be valued over background. Couldn't focusing solely on perceived slights risk overlooking the functional demands of the field?" He stopped pacing, turned. That smile flickered on, colder than usual. "Mark, isn't it?" The way he said my name made it sound like an accusation. "Thank you for sharing your perspective. However, it's crucial we recognize that lived experience, particularly the lived experience of those historically marginalized in STEM, often reveals systemic barriers that aren't visible from a position of privilege." He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "It's a common defense mechanism to prioritize functionality, or merit, without examining how those very concepts can be coded to uphold existing power structures. Perhaps," he added, his gaze sweeping the room, "this is a moment for you to engage in some critical self-reflection on why that perspective feels comfortable to you." He didn't address my point, he pathologized my question. He turned me into a teachable moment, a living example of the unenlightened perspective he was fighting against. I felt my face flush. It wasn't just disagreement, it was public condescension disguised as pedagogy. From that moment on, I knew I was on his radar, and not in a good way. After that classroom exchange, the chill became undeniable. It wasn't overt hostility, not yet. It was more insidious than that. My hand in lectures? Routinely ignored. If I did manage to get called on, Davies would listen with a look of strained patience, often interrupting me with a curt, "Okay, thanks Mark, let's move on," or "interesting point, but let's consider a more nuanced take," before immediately calling on someone like Chloe Jenkins. She was a sharp girl, no doubt, but she had quickly figured out the game. Her comments were invariably laced with Davies' favorite buzzwords, perfectly mirroring his own views, often framed with performative vulnerability. As a queer femme navigating patriarchal spaces, she might begin, before launching into a critique that sounded suspiciously like Davies' lecture notes from the previous week. And Davies would practically glow. "Excellent, Chloe. A truly insightful and courageous contribution," he'd gush, while I and a few others who dared to ask practical or challenging questions were met with silence or subtle correction. The first real hit to my grade came with a midterm essay. It was a straightforward assignment. Analyze a specific social movement using theories discussed in class. I chose the early labor rights movement, focusing on class solidarity and economic drivers, referencing historical accounts and sociological frameworks we'd actually read. I spent hours on it, ensured my arguments were well supported, followed standard academic formatting. I felt pretty good about it. The grade came back, C-. The feedback was sparse but pointed. Analysis overly reliant on traditional Marxist interpretations, neglecting crucial intersectional factors like race and gender within the movement. And the kicker, lacks the critical lens necessary for this level of study. Again, critical lens seemed synonymous with, agrees with Professor Davies. I felt a knot of frustration tighten in my stomach. I saw Dave, the other engineering guy, in the hall later. "How'd you do on the essay?" I asked. He grimaced. "Got a B-." I basically just rephrased his lecture on Foucault and sprinkled in problematize, like 5 times. Felt like total BS, but hey, it worked. He shrugged. "Dude, just tell him what he wants to hear. It's not worth fighting." Part of me knew Dave was right. The smart play was to just regurgitate Davies' ideology, collect the mandatory credit, and escape. But another part of me, the part that believed in intellectual honesty, that valued actual learning, rebelled. It felt wrong. Dishonest. Why should I have to compromise my own thinking, pretend to believe things I didn't, just to appease this guy's ego? Plus, I noticed something else unsettling. Davies' dismissiveness wasn't random. It seemed directed primarily at the male students who questioned him, especially those in technical fields like me or Dave. Meanwhile, his praise for Chloe and a couple of other young women who echoed him felt excessive. Almost paternalistic, but with a weird edge. Was I imagining it? Was I just being paranoid because I got a bad grade? The uncertainty gnawed at me, adding another layer to the simmering resentment. This course was becoming more than just an academic hurdle. It was becoming a source of constant, low-grade psychological stress. Then came the final research paper. 40% of the grade. The make-or-break assignment. The prompt was ridiculously vague. Analyze a significant issue of social injustice using frameworks from the course, centering marginalized perspectives and demonstrating critical reflexivity. It was practically an invitation to write ideological fan fiction. I wrestled with it. Part of me wanted to just phone it in, write some woke Mad Libs like Dave suggested. But damn it, I still had some academic pride left. And frankly, I needed a good grade to offset the C- on the essay. So, I tried to find a compromise. I picked a topic I genuinely cared about, the challenges faced by veterans reintegrating into civilian society. It felt like a legitimate social justice issue, affecting a diverse group often overlooked in academic discourse. I spent weeks researching, interviewing folks at the local VFW hall, anonymously of course, digging into statistics on veteran unemployment, homelessness, and mental health struggles. I structured the paper carefully, presented the data, and yes, I made a conscious, painstaking effort to incorporate Davies' beloved jargon. I talked about the intersectionality of being a veteran with other identities, race, gender, class, disability. I discussed the systemic barriers they faced in accessing healthcare and employment. I even threw in a paragraph about deconstructing stereotypes surrounding military service. It felt forced, unnatural, like translating a clear thought into deliberately obtuse language, but I did it. I cited his preferred theorists alongside my empirical data. I checked every box on his rubric twice. I proofread it until my eyes burned. I submitted it feeling exhausted, slightly compromised, but hopeful that the sheer effort and adherence to his stated requirements would earn me at least a decent grade. Maybe, just maybe, he'd recognize the work. Then came the email. The F. The soul-crushing, future-altering F. And the feedback, it wasn't just negative, it felt malicious. Fundamentally misunderstands the principles of social justice. Analysis centers a predominantly male, often nationalistic group without adequately critiquing the inherent power structures of the military-industrial complex. Fails to demonstrate genuine reflexivity, instead resorting to surface-level engagement with coarse concepts. Perpetuates problematic narratives of victimhood without addressing complicity. He didn't just disagree with my analysis, he twisted it into something ugly. He essentially accused me of being a reactionary simpleton, completely ignoring the weeks of research, the veteran voices I tried to include, the careful attempt to bridge my topic with his frameworks. That night, sleep was impossible. The F wasn't just a grade, it felt like a brand. It would torpedo my GPA. My scholarship had a minimum GPA requirement. The engineering internship I'd lined up for the summer probably did too. My carefully planned future felt like it was crumbling, all because one arrogant professor decided he didn't like my worldview. The unfairness of it all ignited a white-hot rage inside me. This wasn't about academic standards. This was an abuse of power. I emailed him immediately, keeping my tone professional despite the fury boiling beneath the surface, requesting a meeting to discuss the grade and understand how I could have improved. His reply came the next morning, a curt, "My office hours are Tuesday, February 4th p.m. Walking towards his office that Tuesday felt like walking into the lion's den. I clutched my paper, marked up with my own notes highlighting where I'd met each rubric requirement. I rehearsed my points, determined to stay calm and logical. I knocked. "Come in," he called out, his voice smooth as oil. He was leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin, that infuriatingly placid smile fixed on his face. He gestured vaguely towards the uncomfortable guest chair. I sat down, opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off before I could utter a word. "Mark," he began, his tone dripping with faux sympathy, "I received your email. While I appreciate you wanting to discuss the paper, I must reiterate what the feedback already indicated. The work simply didn't demonstrate the level of critical engagement required for this course. It's not merely about presenting information, it's about analyzing power, understanding systemic oppression, and decentering dominant perspectives. Your paper. Well, it unfortunately fell quite short on all those fronts." I pushed my paper forward across his cluttered desk. "Professor Davies, with all due respect, I believe I did address those elements. Right here, I pointed to a section, I discuss intersectionality. Here, I analyze systemic barriers veterans face, citing the course readings. And here." He waved a dismissive hand, not even glancing at the paper. Mark, citing terms isn't the same as understanding them. Your analysis remained fundamentally rooted in a perspective that centers, let's be frank, a privileged group without sufficiently challenging the underlying structures. There's a resistance there, a reluctance to truly grapple with the uncomfortable truths of social injustice." He leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes, students confuse defending their existing worldview with academic rigor. True learning often requires dismantling those comfortable assumptions." My blood pressure spiked. He wasn't listening. He wasn't even pretending to engage with the substance of my work. He was just repeating his ideological dogma, pathologizing my disagreement as resistance stemming from privilege. He was doubling down, making it clear this F was personal and punitive. "So, you're saying," I asked, my voice tight but controlled, "that regardless of the research, the structure, the adherence to the rubric, the grade is based on whether my perspective aligns perfectly with yours?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I'm saying the grade is based on demonstrating mastery of the course's critical frameworks. If you perceive that as a matter of perspective alignment, well, perhaps that perception itself warrants further reflection." It was hopeless. Arguing with him was like arguing with a brick wall, a smug, condescending brick wall. I stood up, gathering my paper. The anger inside me had cooled, replaced by something harder, colder. Determination. "Okay, Professor," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I understand your position." But as I walked out of his office, the thought echoed in my mind, this isn't over. You think you've won, but this isn't over. He had abused his power academically. Now, I was going to find out if he abused it elsewhere. The way he looked at Chloe, the closed-door office hours, my gut screamed that there was more to this story. And I was going to find it. My anger wasn't hot anymore, it was a focused, driving force. I started observing Professor Davies with purpose. Not just in class but around campus. I paid attention to his routines, his interactions. The closed-door office hours became a focal point. Chloe Jenkins was, indeed, a frequent visitor. Sometimes others were waiting outside while she was in there for long stretches, well past the allotted time. I noticed the subtle shifts in his demeanor around her, a softer tone, a lingering gaze, a quick touch on the arm that seemed just a little too familiar for a professor-student relationship. Was I reading too much into it? Maybe. But the F grade, the blatant unfairness, fueled my suspicion. He'd already shown he was capable of unethical behavior in his grading. Why not elsewhere? One evening, I was pulling an all-nighter in the engineering lab, which overlooked the main quad and the humanities building opposite. It was late, probably close to 11. Rain was streaking down the windows. I glanced up from my screen, stretching, and saw a light still burning in Davies' office on the third floor. Strange for a Tuesday night. I kept working, but part of my attention stayed fixed on that lit window. Maybe half an hour later, the light flicked off. Moments later, the main entrance of the humanities building opened. Two figures emerged, huddled under one umbrella. Professor Davies and Chloe. Even from across the quad, through the rain-streaked glass, I could see she wasn't smiling. Her posture was tense, shoulders hunched. Davies had his arm around her shoulder, pulling her close as they hurried towards the faculty parking lot. It didn't look protective. It looked possessive. Controlling almost. He opened the passenger door of his pretentious hybrid SUV for her, said something sharp. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone carried, and she got in quickly, almost flinching. He walked around, got into the driver's seat, and they drove off into the rainy night. Seeing that, it crystallized everything. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't just a professor being overly friendly. This felt deeply wrong. Predatory even. Why was he driving her off campus so late at night? Why did she look so distressed? The image burned itself into my mind. The power imbalance was stark, sickening. The man preaching about protecting the vulnerable was clearly exploiting one of his own students. My mind went into overdrive. This was it. This had to be the key. I needed proof. Concrete proof. Sitting back down at the lab computer, I didn't go back to my engineering problem. I opened a browser. I started searching. Not just his name but hers too. Trying different combinations, looking for connections on social media, student forums, anything. It felt skeezy, like I was violating someone's privacy, but the memory of his smug face as he failed me, the image of Chloe looking scared in the rain, it pushed me forward. Justice demanded it. It took hours, navigating through layers of privacy settings and dead ends. Then a breakthrough. An old comment Chloe had made on a university hiking club's public page years ago linked to a secondary Instagram profile. The username was innocuous, something generic like CityLights88. The profile was private, but the profile picture, it was a blurry shot of a cat, but in the background, partially visible, was a distinctive, brightly colored abstract painting. A painting I recognized, because Davies had bragged about owning it during a lecture, calling it a vital piece by an important queer artist of color. My heart started hammering. This had to be her private account. Now how to get access? I couldn't. But maybe Davies wasn't as careful. I started searching variations of his name, nicknames, even common academic terms combined with numbers. Then I tried searching using the handle of a commenter who had replied to Chloe's old public comment. Someone with a default avatar and a nonsensical username. Clicking through related accounts, I stumbled upon another private profile, critical thinker _75. Also locked. But the profile picture, it was him. A slightly younger Davies, leaning against a bookshelf trying to look intellectual. And crucially, this profile followed CityLights88. It wasn't direct proof of interaction, but the connection was there. The painting in her profile pic, his profile following hers, it was too coincidental. Driven now, I tried one more thing. Searching for those usernames on other, less secure platforms. An old, mostly abandoned Tumblr blog linked to critical thinker _75. And there, buried in reblogs of obscure academic articles and pretentious quotes, were a handful of posts tagged with #personal or #afterhours. And one blurry photo. A selfie clearly taken inside Davies' car. You could see his distinctive glasses on the dashboard. And reflected in the side mirror, unmistakable even in the poor quality, was Chloe looking uncomfortable. Below it, a caption, "Late-night study sessions require commitment, winky face." The winking face symbol felt like a punch to the gut. Then I found it, a link to a supposedly anonymous forum discussing campus life. Someone using the handle CityLights88 had posted months ago, vaguely complaining about feeling pressured by a professor, mentioning late meetings and unwanted attention. Another user, critical thinker _75, had replied publicly, dismissively telling her she was misinterpreting academic mentorship and needed to appreciate the guidance. It was horrifying. He wasn't just involved with her, he was gaslighting her publicly under pseudonyms. I saved everything. Screenshots of the profiles, the photo, the forum posts, the comments. Dates, times, URLs. The evidence was circumstantial, maybe, but compelling. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The man who built his entire career on the performance of ethical purity, on railing against power imbalances, was engaged in a clandestine, manipulative relationship with a student, likely leveraging his position for personal gain and silencing her when she felt uncomfortable. He hadn't just failed me, he had betrayed every principle he claimed to uphold. The game had changed. I wasn't just fighting for my grade anymore. I was fighting to expose a fraud. Armed with a folder of meticulously organized screenshots and a chilling sense of clarity, I knew I couldn't just sit on this. It wasn't just about my F anymore, it was about Davies' ongoing abuse of power and Chloe's situation. But I had to be smart. Going straight to the top without giving Davies one last chance to self-destruct felt incomplete. Plus, documenting his reaction would only strengthen my case. I sent him another email, formal and brief. Professor Davies, I request one final meeting to discuss my grade and potential avenues for appeal, as per university policy. He agreed, probably sighing internally at my persistence, setting a time for the following afternoon. Walking into his office for the third time felt different. The anger was still there, but it was overlaid with a cold, hard certainty. I knew what he was and I had the proof. He started immediately, adopting a weary, paternalistic tone. Mark, we've been over this. While I admire your tenacity, the grade stands. Perhaps this experience can be a valuable lesson in. I held up a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. The surprise flickered across his face. Professor, I said, keeping my voice calm and level, meeting his gaze directly. Let's dispense with the pretense about the paper, shall we? I think we both know my grade had very little to do with critical engagement, and much more to do with your personal biases. He bristled instantly. Now see here, Evans. That's a serious accusation. Is it? I leaned forward slightly. Or is it just an observation? Perhaps your judgment is clouded. Perhaps by other relationships. Relationships that constitute a serious conflict of interest. For instance, I let the name hang in the air, your relationship with Chloe Jenkins. If his face had gone pale before, now it was sheet white. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. The smugness evaporated, replaced by raw panic. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, his voice suddenly high-pitched. Chloe is a bright student, nothing more. How dare you imply otherwise? Oh, I'm not implying, Professor, I said, my voice dropping lower. I'm stating. Late nights? Driving her off campus? The private Instagram accounts, CityLights88, Critical Thinker _75? The photo in your car? The forum posts where you dismissed her concerns about feeling pressured? Does any of that ring a bell? He shot up from his chair, knocking a stack of papers to the floor. His face contorted with rage and fear. You little snake. You've been spying on me? Illegally accessing private information. I'll have you arrested. Expelled. Ruined. I remained seated, calm in the face of his meltdown. Actually, Professor, everything I found was publicly accessible if one knows where to look. Poor digital hygiene on your part, I suppose. And the only person who seems poised for ruin here is you. Exploiting a student, abusing your authority, academic fraud, it's quite a list. Doesn't exactly scream social justice warrior, does it? He sputtered, incoherent threats pouring out of him, lawsuits, contacting my parents, ruining my reputation. It was pathetic watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. I stood up. Save your breath, Professor. It's too late. I've documented everything meticulously. And as per university policy regarding serious ethical violations, I paused for effect. I've already scheduled a meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow with Dean Miller and Department Head Thompson. I felt they should be aware of the full context surrounding my grade dispute. I walked to the door. I suggest you prepare your defense. Though frankly, I don't think it will help. I left him standing there, slack-jawed and trembling, amidst the scattered papers on his office floor. The meeting the next morning was exactly as I anticipated, tense, serious. Dean Miller, a formidable woman with sharp eyes, and Dr. Thompson, who looked deeply uncomfortable, sat opposite me at a large conference table. I started calmly, methodically. First, I laid out the academic issue. My paper, the rubric, Davies' vague and punitive feedback, his refusal to discuss specifics, the C- on the earlier essay despite following instructions, the pattern of dismissiveness towards dissenting views. I presented copies of everything. They listened intently, nodding gravely. Dean Miller's frown deepened. "This is concerning on its own, Mr. Evans," she said. "Professor Davies' feedback seems unprofessional at the very least." "I agree," I replied. "But unfortunately, Dean, I believe there's a deeper reason for his biased behavior and lack of accountability." I took a breath. "I have discovered evidence of a highly inappropriate and unethical relationship between Professor Davies and another student in the class, Chloe Jenkins. I believe this relationship has compromised his professional judgment, led to academic favoritism, and constitutes a serious abuse of his position." The air crackled. Dr. Thompson gasped audibly. Dean Miller's expression became granite. "Explain," she commanded, her voice low and dangerous. I laid out everything. The observations of their interactions. The late-night departure from campus. The discovery of the linked social media accounts under pseudonyms. I presented the screenshots, the incriminating photo taken in his car, the revealing online comments, the forum posts where he publicly gaslit her concerns. I explained the timeline, connecting his increasing favoritism towards Chloe with his escalating hostility towards me after I questioned him. I concluded, this isn't just about my unfair grade. It's about a pattern of unethical conduct, manipulation, and potential exploitation hiding behind a veneer of progressive ideology. Dean Miller examined the evidence silently, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dr. Thompson looked physically ill. After a long moment, the dean looked up, her eyes hard as steel. "Mr. Evans, thank you. Bringing this forward must have been difficult, but you absolutely did the right thing. The evidence you've presented is deeply disturbing. The university has zero tolerance for this kind of behavior. We will launch an immediate and thorough investigation. Professor Davies will be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending the outcome." She paused. "And your paper will be re-evaluated by Dr. Thompson personally." The news spread through the department, then the wider campus like wildfire. Despite the administration's attempts at discretion, the suspension of a professor, especially one as vocal and prominent as Davies, couldn't be kept quiet. The reactions ranged from stunned disbelief, "Professor Davies? No way," to cynical lack of surprise, "Always thought there was something off about him." His woke warrior persona imploded spectacularly. The hypocrisy was just too blatant, too ugly. The investigation confirmed everything. Chloe, likely relieved to be free from his influence and assured of university support, cooperated fully. Faced with the overwhelming evidence in her testimony, Davies had no defense. A few weeks later, the official email landed in every faculty and student inbox in the department. Professor Alistair Davies's employment had been terminated due to gross violations of the university's code of conduct and ethical standards. He was gone. Scrubbed from the faculty directory, his classes reassigned. Just like that. Poof. Chloe, I heard, finished the semester with support from the dean's office and access to counseling. I truly hope she found peace and could move forward. She was manipulated by a man who should have protected her. As for me, Dr. Thompson regraded my paper based on its actual merits, its research, its structure. I got an A-. My final grade for SOC 101 was adjusted accordingly. My GPA was safe. My scholarship was safe. My internship offer remained firm. The storm had passed. Walking across campus afterwards, breathing in the crisp autumn air, felt like waking up from a nightmare. Relief washed over me, profound and cleansing. But it wasn't just relief, it was satisfaction. Deep, righteous satisfaction. Davies, the self-proclaimed champion of the marginalized, the arbiter of inclusivity, the man who judged and condemned others based on their adherence to his rigid ideology, was brought down by his own sordid secrets, his own blatant hypocrisy. He tried to use the language of social justice as both a shield and a weapon, and it backfired spectacularly. He failed me for not being inclusive enough in his narrow, twisted definition of the word. But in the end, his own actions, his exclusion of dissenting thought, his manipulation of a vulnerable student, his profound ethical failures, led to his own very permanent exclusion from the academic community. He preached about deconstructing power while abusing his own. There was a certain poetic justice in that, a karmic balancing of the scales that felt undeniably right. He thought he could ruin my future based on his ideology, but his forbidden scandal ruined his instead. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. Sometimes, exposing the rot hiding beneath the surface is the only way to truly achieve justice.